welcome back or welcome if you're new. I'm Zara and I have a couple of disabilities that I post about, but this video is going to be about functional neurological disorder, which squishes down to FND. Now the 13th of April is actually FND Awareness Day, so this week's video is going to be all about FND as a condition and a little bit of my experience dealing with it and living with it. I will do an entire video based on my journey detailing like all the different parts of it, but this is going to be more of a generalized video teaching you about the symptoms and the condition and a little bit about how you can help people who are living with it, or maybe how you can be more accepting and understanding. Just a few of the pointers that I've learned from my own experience. I do want to preface this by saying I am not a neurologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not qualified medically to diagnose this or to give out advice on it, but I am somebody who's lived with it for around 4 years now. I have my own experiences and I'm going to be talking from that perspective, but every single person with FND has had a slightly different experience, and obviously symptoms can change. People have different symptoms. You don't have to have all of the things I've experienced in order to have FND. So if you do think you're experiencing any of these things or you're worried about your own health, please speak to a doctor, an actual professional. And yeah, please try and speak to a neurologist if you are experiencing any neurological symptoms, because a YouTube video, as helpful as they are, it cannot diagnose you or give you medical professional advice about symptoms. So first, I want to talk about what FND is and the kind of symptoms that it causes. I will link some resources down below, so if you do want to research a little bit more or find out where I'm kind of getting all these facts from and what I'm referencing, I will leave links to all the websites and charities down below. So FND stands for Functional Neurological Disorder, which basically means there's a problem with the functioning of the brain. FND causes disruptions in the signals between the brain and the body, meaning the functioning and the signals don't work as they're supposed to. FND is often associated as a software problem rather than a hardware problem, meaning it's to do with the signals and the functioning of the brain rather than a structural damage to the brain. It's quite a difficult illness to diagnose because there isn't a test that shows up and says, yes, positive for FND. There's not a scan that you can do that brings up an obvious defect in the brain, although there have been images recently that have surfaced. I think it was MRI scans, and it has shown structural differences in people with FND. So we're finally getting somewhere with research, but there isn't a lot of research about FND, unfortunately, because there isn't enough funding. But that's why people with FND like me want to educate about it, because so many people don't know what the condition is. It makes it really difficult to get support and understanding, even in the healthcare system. As I've touched on, you can probably tell that FND is difficult to diagnose. It is actually considered a rare disease, but the actual prevalence and diagnosis rate of it doesn't reflect how many people suffer with functional neurological symptoms, and it is widely thought that a lot of people with FND maybe aren't diagnosed or they're misdiagnosed, so it's really difficult to pinpoint how common it actually is. I read a statistic that around a third of neurology referrals actually end up being diagnosed as FND, which to me doesn't suggest a rare condition. I know so many people who have had neurological symptoms that have ended up being diagnosed with FND, or they've had functional neurological symptoms, but it's still considered a rare disease, and I don't know whether that is neurological problems are rarer in general, or whether it's because of the lack of understanding and awareness surrounding FND, so people don't really talk about it. But I'm hoping to change that. I'm hoping that by talking about it more and sharing my own experiences and encouraging others to share their stories and their experiences, we can slowly try and destigmatize FND as a condition, because I have had to educate so many doctors on my own condition because they don't know what it is and they're supposed to be telling me what to do, and it's a really frustrating spot to be in. Because it's difficult being a disabled person if people don't know what your condition is and you have to spend your energy trying to educate them and tell them what you need and what your condition is. It wastes so much energy that could be spent on trying to put in place things to help your symptoms or to improve your condition. A lot of awareness definitely does need to be done, but this is a start. Okay, so symptoms of FND. This is a very wide spectrum. It's more of a really wide spectrum of different presentations that FND can take, and all of these are valid. You don't have to have every single symptom to have FND. I think one of the most prevalent co-occurrences of FND are non-epileptic seizures, or NES. Now, this is technically a separate diagnosis, but it comes under the FND umbrella. So I have FND with NES. Functional neurological disorder with non-epileptic seizures. So seizures are probably my number one biggest symptom, along with paralysis. Those two are like the big symptoms that I think a lot of people with FND do suffer with, and they're quite debilitating symptoms too. They're very obvious, and I think they were the reason that I knew that something was going on with my body. The other symptoms sometimes can be put down to other things, or you're not really sure what it is, whereas being paralysed or having a seizure is a very obvious kind of problem, I guess. It's very obvious that something's going wrong and that it's neurological. Those were my first symptoms, and they're still my most prevalent symptoms, but there are so many other things that people suffer with. I'm going to read out a list of symptoms that I have, and then I'm going to add in the ones that are maybe more rare or that only some people have. Chronic fatigue is one. I have chronic fatigue. Chronic pain, they are definitely ones that go a lot more unnoticed because it's hard to pinpoint and it's hard to explain to people that chronic fatigue is very different to tiredness, and chronic pain is very different to having a pain or an injury. Headaches, migraines, weakness. Weakness is a big one of mine. I often get weakness that's in one limb or another, so usually I get it from the waist down, so it's my legs. My legs are the most affected thing by my FND. It's typically the left side of my body first. I don't really understand, I don't really know what causes that, but generally the left side of my body goes weak first, and my left leg is always slightly worse than my right leg, but usually it's always my legs that kind of the symptoms go to first. Another big one, especially for me, is dystonia or limb locking. This is where muscles contract and they stay. So my wrists lock like this, and I've had it locked like this, completely rigid, not being able to move anything for 2 weeks at a time before. So it's obviously quite painful if it's stuck like that for a very long period of time. Even if it's stuck like that for just like 4 to 8 hours, it's still very painful and it's very debilitating. You can't do anything if you can't use your hands because you're not used to it, and for someone who usually has full use of their hands, suddenly having them locked like this is very, I don't know, it's very hard. You can't do anything. You can't feed yourself, you can't go to the toilet, you can't put your hair up. Like, every single little thing is affected by just that one symptom. That also happens with my feet. It's very hard to explain, but my feet lock inwards. So like the hands, it just locks cramped like in to the side. It can cramp in other positions, I think, and I know people who have had dystonia that is maybe their whole legs or their whole arms, and I know people whose arms kind of crunch inwards and they get stuck like this. I've had one do that before, again the left side. But yeah, dystonia is basically just where the muscles cramp and they stay. It's not fun. It's very painful. I'm laughing as I say this, but it's just my way of getting information across. It is not funny whatsoever. It's a really, really freaking difficult condition to live with, and I try and look on the positive side of things, but it's really difficult. It's really hard. I don't know if that comes across fully in videos and things that I post, because I try and stay lighthearted and educate about it, and, you know, try and keep upbeat, because this is my life, this is my reality, so I don't want to live being miserable, and it is hard, it's difficult. But yeah, there are some of the symptoms that I have, but other ones that I have actually experienced before are visual disturbances or loss of sight, loss of hearing, involuntary movements. So this can actually look like tics. Functional tics are a symptom, but I have Tourette syndrome personally, which is a separate diagnosis, but I happen to have the two. But yeah, FND can actually cause tics, but it's not the same as Tourette's. Cognitive changes, gait and balance problems, or foot drop is a really common one, which is where if you're walking, your feet don't pick up to place on another step, if that makes sense. If I was walking, my foot would do this instead of picking up and going down. I often get that along with my paralysis or dystonia or weakness symptoms. That's a very common thing that my legs generally do. Speech problems is also a really common one. Hopefully, touch wood, don't get this as much anymore, but I used to get this especially surrounding my really seizure-y days when I had a lot of seizure activity going on, and I'd lose my speech, I'd stammer a lot, and I'd just basically slur and not be able to get words out. Sleep disturbances is another one. Insomnia, bladder or bowel changes, brain fog, memory loss. What else? I can remember 2 more symptoms that I have, and then I'm going to leave it there because the list does just go on. 2 big symptoms that I've had before are drop attacks, which are basically where my entire body just loses its tension, I think is a good way to explain it. I just drop. Usually it's my head, but it can be my entire body. I will feel it coming, a little bit like the feeling before a seizure, and I will just drop and everything will go limp and I will just like hit the floor or hit the table. It's not very fun. It can either happen really quickly and suddenly like that, and I have dropped to the floor quite a lot of times. That used to happen a lot in school and in college as well. I've dropped to the floor in front of entire classrooms or an entire canteen full of people when I was paying for my food. That was a fun one. That is sarcasm. That was not fun at all. But it can also happen slowly where it feels more like a sleep attack, because sleep attacks are also things. So like drop attacks or sleep attacks where I kind of fold in and I can't move. So it's not like fainting because I'm still awake. I'm still kind of aware. I'm just a bit drowsy and it just feels like my body goes to sleep but my mind is still awake. It's really difficult to explain. I'll maybe have to do a video on those symptoms in general and try and explain the feelings behind them. Let's move on. Who can FND affect? FND can affect anybody, and I don't mean this in like a threatening way, but it could happen to you. It could happen to your family, your friends. There isn't a certain criteria that someone has to meet in order to develop FND. It can literally affect anybody at any age. I think FND is most common in young people, so like young adults and adults I think are the most predominantly affected group, but it can affect children, it affects a lot of teenagers, it affects a lot of adults, both men and women, although I think it is more prevalent in women. But yeah, it can affect anybody, and it can happen suddenly or it can happen after trauma. There is no set reason for someone developing FND. FND is considered to be multifactorial, which is a difficult word to say, but it also means there isn't one factor that contributes to developing the condition. There are so many different aspects to FND, like it can be triggered by stress, it can be made worse by stress even if it isn't caused by it, it can come after trauma, after head injury, it could come at random. I know people who have not had a history of mental illness, they've not had any trauma go on, and they've just woken up one day with the symptoms and their life has been changed and they've become disabled. So I think it's really important not to judge FND patients, not to judge people with FND and think you're struggling mentally so it's becoming a thing physically. That is a really big misconception of FND, is that it is a psychological problem that is manifesting as a physical problem. This stems from an old label, conversion disorder, which used to be put on FND patients wrongly. This is not the same thing. Conversion disorder is not FND, and that is why that label is not used. It's really harmful. FND is not a psychological problem. It's a neurological problem with the functioning of the brain, and it can be triggered by, in some cases, mental illness or trauma, but that is not the reason behind the brain's lack of functioning. That is simply a trigger or a stressor that makes the symptoms worse, or it can be a factor in the onset of it. Is there a cure for FND? No. There isn't a cure or a specific treatment. There's no pill that you can be given to get rid of it. It's not something that you get diagnosed with and then you do 6 months of treatment and you're fine, you've recovered. It's something that is considered a chronic illness, it's a chronic condition, but some people can recover from it. Some people's symptoms do go away and they're either managing them better so they're not affected by it, or some people in years to come it might disappear. But there is no way to definitely get rid of it. It's just something that we have to live with, and it's more learning to manage and live despite having it and with it, rather than trying to rid yourself of the condition. I personally have had symptoms for 4 years already, and it's been said that it is a chronic condition, and it's very unlikely that after all this time and the sheer prevalence of all my symptoms that it's going to magically go away. But everyone's experience is different, so getting an FND diagnosis isn't a life sentence to severe disability. It does mean that it probably isn't going to go away, and with different life events, or if you have a specific traumatic year of your life, your symptoms may come back, or they may go if you stop working and you have more rest time. I think it's more dependent on what your life is like at the minute. I'm personally quite busy at the minute. I've had a lot on and my symptoms are worse. I'm now in my wheelchair 80% of the time rather than, say, 20 or 30%. And that leads into coping strategies, which honestly varies from person to person. For me, my main coping strategies are reducing stress, reducing my workload. Leaving school was a massive thing that really improved my symptoms. That was the main thing that got me to a functioning level that I'm at now. Yeah, just making my life less stressful, cutting out friendships and toxic people, making my life just a bit more enjoyable and easier and quieter, and keeping to myself a bit more has really helped. And then of course mobility aids, so I have a couple pairs of crutches, a lot of braces and physical things to help when symptoms are flaring up. That just helps to support myself so I don't get injured and then make the symptoms worse. And my wheelchair helps conserve a lot of energy, which helps with multiple different symptoms. And obviously my wheelchair really helps if I'm paralysed and my limbs literally aren't working, then I need to use that. But just putting things in place to help whenever the symptoms appear, that is the most helpful thing that I've found. And it's just learning to live with it and finding a community, and learning that although you can't necessarily control your symptoms, learning to not let FND control you and determine how happy you can be or what you can do. Living with FND is hard. It's hard and it can be lonely and isolating, so I think trying to reach out to a community and putting all these things in place to make sure that you can live your life no matter what symptoms you're having, I think that is a really useful and really relieving thing to kind of put in place. Making the switch from I need to wait until I'm better to do things, and I can do things now if I accommodate enough and do things in the way that I need to, is the thing that helped the most in me accepting my FND diagnosis and accepting the fact that yes, I'm chronically ill, I'm disabled, and it's not going anywhere, but it's okay because I'm still worthy as a person. I can still live a really happy life despite my symptoms. Yes, it's a bit more difficult. Yes, I freaking hate the symptoms a lot of the time, and it's not fun, and it's painful, and it's exhausting, but it doesn't mean that I can't live my life and still be an amazing person. You still are worthy, and you still are capable, and you can do so many things even if you do have FND. It doesn't have to stop and put a halt to your entire life. It can change your life. It definitely changed mine. I thought I'd be at university doing this and driving. I can't do any of those things, but I love my life. I've found other things that I love and I've adapted to it, and I've just accepted that this is my life now and I like it. That is a great note to end on. I'm glad I made the little full circle. Back to an update of how I am now. My legs are so bad at the minute. I'm using my wheelchair. My legs are completely numb from the knees down for some reason. Yeah, my legs are just really not good at the minute. My symptoms are flaring up, but I've done things. I went out to the park yesterday in my wheelchair and got very muddy. I've been socialising, I've been doing things, but because I've put these accommodations like crutches and wheelchair and rest in place, I can still live my life despite having my symptoms. But yeah, I hope that educates you. I'm sorry if that was a very long rambly video. I will try and edit out as much as I can and make it as digestible as possible, but I hope you learnt something. I hope it was interesting, or if you have FND yourself, I hope you feel comforted or maybe less lonely by watching and knowing that you're not alone and that there is a community out there and that you can do things. You're capable, you are worthy, FND doesn't have to define who you are as a person. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe if you liked it. I'm going to be doing a couple videos on FND because it is FND Awareness Month. FND Awareness Day is when this is going to go up, but I'm going to continue to post about it, especially since my symptoms are flaring up at the minute, and that is a great time for me to record them and get a little bit of education in. But yeah, I will see you next Sunday 5 PM for another video, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Bye.